Logos, POW!
To do something different from what I usually do on YouTube, I wanted to talk about Konami. No, this is not another Konami bashing rant about Hideo Kojima, PT and Silent Hills. I won't focus heavily on later Konami games from the 32-bit era onwards. Sure, Metal Gear, Silent Hill, they're all great, but I want to focus more on the Konami name and what it meant to me and many others in the late 80s and the early 90s. Now, growing up in England, Konami was synonymous with the arcades and their subsequent home computer ports. Ocean, through its Imagine label, had the most prominent deal with Konami, releasing conversions of many coin-ops for the Spectrum, C64 and the Amstrad. First time I recall playing a Konami game was Nemesis, or Gradius as it's known outside the UK. I was hooked on it, and it led the way for my obsession with shoot-em-ups of all kinds. When Nemesis was announced for the C64, I jumped at the chance, and upon receiving the good reviews from the gaming press, I bought it. It was okay for the time, I enjoyed it, but seeing the MSX and Famicom versions in CVG magazine was an eye-opener to what Konami were doing in Japan. In the coming years, I played more Konami games. Green Beret, Salamander, Grisor, which everyone now knows as Contra, Combat School and Jackal, which all received conversions of variable quality from home computers. I would still make trips to Margate arcades, especially to play games. New games were introduced over the next few years, games like Gradius, aka Vulcan Venture, Super Contra, the Grisor name had been dropped, Thundercross, Wreck Le Mans, Haunted Castle, Typhoon and Gradius 3. Some were converted to home computers, but most of these later titles weren't. In 1991, Nintendo announced the Super Famicom, and with it, screenshots emerged of a conversion of Gradius 3. That was it, I had to have a Super Famicom just for this game, and in 1992, I scraped together enough money to buy one and a copy of Gradius 3. I had, as far as I was concerned, the arcade game at home. Konami delivered many classic Super Nintendo and Super Famicom games over the next few years. Contra 3, Gradius, Pop and Queen Bee, Cybernator, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the mighty Axlay. It was the 16-bit Nintendo that introduced me to the joys of Super Castlevania 4, being only familiar with Haunted Castle before this. It became one of my favourite games. Konami also released some great titles on the Sega Mega Drive. It had its own versions of Contra and Castlevania, amongst others, even if they were released at the end of the Mega Drive's life. Towards the end of the 16-bit era, I bought a PC Engine. This provided me with excellent versions of Gradius, Gradius 2, Salamander, Twin Bee and Parodius. They were released at the end of the system's life again, but they were still excellent versions. In 1995, the PlayStation was released here. Konami was quite slow releasing titles outside Japan for it, but in time they released Suikoden and its sequel, Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Vandal Hearts. In Japan, they released the Greatest Deluxe Pack, which for the very first time had a truly arcade-perfect version of these games with a new F&V intro. This was followed by the Salamander Deluxe Pack a couple of years later. The last hurrah for Konami in terms of what games was now regarded as retro games was Gradius Gaiden from 1997, a superb game and maybe the best Gradius game there's been. 1998 saw the release of Metal Gear Solid. Konami had a massive hit on their hands, an engrossing and inventive action-adventure. With this, Konami became a household name again. The superb Silent Hill was released a year later. 32-bit gamers had some really great games to get their teeth into. But this shift in tastes and sales left traditional 2D games behind. There wasn't a new Gradius game specifically for home systems until 2004's Gradius 5, programmed ironically by Treasure, who were made up of ex-Konami employees. Konami was now committed to its cornerstone franchises. Aside from the two 2.5D Contra titles and the 3D Castlevania games, the old Konami had been swept away. I just wasn't interested in their games anymore. Metal Gear as a series was becoming less of a game, more of an extended cutscene, and Silent Hill, after 3 sequels, became a shadow of its former self, being shunted out to external developers. Gradius, Contra and Castlevania had rebirth games on the Wii. These were pretty good, but didn't seem to be particularly successful. And that was Konami as I saw it. Great games, fantastic music, brilliantly detailed sprites. Sadly, the demise of the arcade scene that flourished in the late 80s and early 90s marked the end of Konami's golden years in my opinion. The move into 3D gaming changed the landscape radically as well. Now obviously I haven't covered everything here. There have been other Konami games released over the years that are still great, but they didn't mean as much to me, so sorry if I've missed a favour of yours. I hope you've enjoyed this, chuck me a tweet if you did, and thank you for watching. Here, subscribe or naff off.